delighted to have you here today. This event is jointly sponsored by Environmental Action Germany, otherwise known as DUH, which I will not try to say in German, the Leave It in the Ground Initiative, Lingo, Methane Action, and the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development. My name is Daphne Gleisham, and I am the CEO of Methane Action and co-founder of the Methane Emergency Break campaign, which you can join at methaneemergencybreak.org. So today at this roundtable, we will be discussing during New York Climate Week, halfway through the global methane pledge, methane emissions are accelerating. Can we hit the brakes? What we were thinking when we pulled this event together was how critical it was to connect our colleagues in Europe with those of us working in North America at this moment in time. There is currently a $750 billion deal on the table between the US and the EU to export LNG, liquefied natural gas. And the global methane pledge is, of course, at the halfway mark, and agricultural emissions of methane also continue to rise. So we felt it was very urgent to bring some speakers from the EU together with speakers from the US to discuss this issue. So some of our speakers are caught in other meetings, and they will be joining us shortly. But I wanted to turn it over to the president and founder, perfect timing, of the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, Durwood Selke. So Durwood, why now? Why are we concerned? And please do take a microphone because we are live streaming. Why are we so concerned about methane? We say we're in a methane emergency. What does that mean exactly?
Daphne, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
And somebody had to take me on the subway, just so I could get here on time. Is this?
It's on, just closer. There you go.
There you go. It's very simple. It's too hot. We're 1.5 degrees. The latest IPCC report says we're at 3 degrees. We have too little time before the self-amplifying feedbacks push us past a series of tipping points. There are 5 to 11 irreversible tipping points between 1.5 and 2 degrees. So 1.5 today, 2 tomorrow, 3 soon after. I mean, we are in a climate emergency. So we need the strategies that are the fastest way to turn down warming. It should be obvious, but we originally, those of us who worked on this for decades, thought that climate might be a long-term problem. 100 years WP, we can figure this out in the future. But the moment is now that we need to bend the warming curve. So you look at the strategies, you look at the decarbonization side, which is absolutely essential. We need to move to clean energy as fast as we possibly can. But you discover that is not the fast way to turn down warming. It's a long-term marathon. That's because it's politically difficult, but it's also because when you shut down fossil fuel facilities, especially coal, diesel, you shut down the co-emitted cooling sulfates, and they fall out in days to weeks, and they unmask existing warming. There was an op-ed this week in the New York Times by the House author and David Keith pointing out the unmasking problem. Jim Hansen refers to it as the Faustian bargain. As we clean up the air, as we decarbonize, we're exposing existing warming. It's already in the system. Now, the op-ed, unfortunately, came to the wrong conclusion for the solution. They said we should go to the geoengineering solution and put sulfates back into the atmosphere. And that's not the first thing I put on the list for fast mitigation. Well, what I put on the list, well, it's the non-CO2 short-lived superfoods. Because when you cut these, you think of it as the sprint, you get 4 times more avoided warming at 2050. So you get somewhere between 0.4 and 0.6 degrees at 2050 compared to 0.1 degrees from decarbonization. Decarbonization kicks in around 2060, starts going up fast. But it's the marathon. So the non-CO2 is the sprint. And within that sprint, methane is the most important piece. And I just came from a meeting with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition that Bloomberg was hosting. And every single minister and head of state there used the facts and figures from the CCAC on methane. This is the methane. And at least the staff wrote the right things for ministers. And I think some of the ministers, like Alabama, really do get it. And they see that methane is right. And so we're doing promises and pledges. These have been okay to get us going, to socialize the issue. But it's no longer sufficient in a climate emergency to say promises will do. You have to have mandatory mitigation. So that's the direction of travel. It can be done at the municipal level for waste, if you prefer, but it's got to be mandatory. It can be done at the state level, like California. It can be done at the national level, European, regional level. The European methane regulation is the most important one in the world right now. We need to multilateralize that.
And we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about that at the very end.
Okay.
So maybe what we could do is segue from this really important overview towards what we hear more from you and kick off the fossil methane panel. So Justin Mikulka with Oilfield Witness and Konstantin Zerger, also of Environment Action Germany. Environment Action Germany is a non-governmental environmental and consumer protection organization founded in 1975. And we will also be hearing in our second panel on agricultural sources of emission once this one is over. So, Justin, starting with you, we hear that certified low-intensity methane is a way for U.S. LNG, liquefied natural gas exporters to meet the terms of the EU methane regulations for imports to the EU. Can you give us a sense of whether or not this is in fact true?
No.
How about you've got to turn your microphone on?
Check. I think, okay. So to answer your question, no, I don't believe certification is a legitimate approach, and I would put certification in the category of clean coal. We were promised clean coal 10 years ago. I think right now, other than the people running this country, laughs at the idea of clean coal. And so what now we're being sold is the idea of clean methane. And we know that LNG from the U.S. based on peer-reviewed science is worse than coal. And so now what we're basically doing, we're mocking the idea of clean coal. But we're saying this product, fossil fuel, that we burn, is prettier than coal, but we're going to make it slightly better. And that's going to be clean. It's not, and it's not possible. And I think it's put this into perspective as a delay strategy of what we were told about carbon capture 10 or 15 years ago. We were promised that we would have natural gas power plants capturing 99% of the carbon. We would have clean gas. No one is talking about that now because it's not possible. And so what we're getting with methane certification, in my opinion, is we're heading right down the same path, being sold another delay strategy and told this climate solution. If you just heard what Derwin said, we're talking about increasing the amount of methane we're producing in this country by a huge amount, liquefying it and exporting it to the world to be burned. There is no climate solution that involves combusting fossil fuels. Certification is trying to get us here if we want any hope of achieving the goals that you're telling us we must, there is no path to addressing climate change and reducing emissions that involves using more methane.
Okay, so what do you think is the most important thing we can do right now to address the methane emergency?
I really think we need to be honest, start having much more honest conversations about this topic, so that we're not, in the, there is no way to produce more methane and decrease global methane emissions. And if you need evidence of that, 4 years ago, the whole world agreed that we definitely needed to drastically reduce methane emissions by 2030. In those 4 years, it's only gone up. We've produced a lot more methane in the time period. Production of methane means higher methane emissions. And so I think we need to stop talking about methane as a climate solution, but also 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you could have argued with me that we need gas in the system because renewables aren't going to be able to do it, and batteries, grid-scale storage was far too expensive. Well, guess what happened in the last 5 years? Grid-scale storage is cheap, solar is really cheap, and around the world, no one is building new gas power. They're building solar plus storage. That is the path to reducing methane emissions. It's why China is using less LNG, India, Pakistan, Thailand, they all are using a lot more solar. That is how we reduce methane emissions.
Okay, Konstantin, it's your turn. Justin has talked about the reality of methane emissions associated with the production and transport of fossil gas, and much of that, of course, is going to the EU. We are expecting these exports to grow massively over the next few years. How does this sit with Germany's role as a champion of the global methane pledge?
Well, first I have to express my frustration with that role of Germany. I always hear that Germany is supposed to be the champion of the global methane pledge, but when you look closer, Germany doesn't have the targets to reduce methane emissions. It doesn't have a reduction plan. And what kind of champion is that? To be fair, there are some positive things when it comes to the implementation of the methane regulation, which is tremendously important, and the German government is pushing on that. We're going to talk about it later, I guess. It's an important issue. But the other thing that is of absolute importance is what you mentioned. Germany and Europe is importing lots of LNG, which is one of the dirtiest fuels we have on this planet. And there are even plans to expand that. You mentioned the 750 billion dollar deal, which was signed, which is bizarre because it can never be met. The numbers don't add up. There's not so much that can be produced in the United States, and Europe will never be able to use that. But anyways, this points into a direction. And the direction is that more gas shall be used in Europe, and the United States want us to buy it. They're completely ignoring what you have proven to have on the ground, and they don't want us to know that. So I think it's an important job for us to spread the word. So I'm really a big fan of your work. We use that a lot to show what this is really about. The reality is, so I think it's absolutely imperative that we find strategies to reduce energy export or imports, that we find strategies to reduce gas demand. And would also like to say that there are some promising signs because the European Union has adopted some ambitious policies. That's quite significant. The European Union seeks to halve its gas demand by 2030. And it's already on the way. Gas demand has been reduced by 20% between 21 and 24. Now, this is about political decisions that need to be made. Are we going to sign deals, and are we going to live up to those deals, or are we going to invest in the energy transition on the other hand? None of them. This needs to happen. This is about political decisions we have to make right now in Europe and in the United States. I think that's an important thing that lies ahead, that we need to defend the regulation, that we need to come up with a strong import standard for methane, then we need to adopt gas phase-out plans because otherwise this problem will never be solved.
So we know that the Trump administration's lobbyists are pressuring the EU to weaken the EU methane regulations, which my understanding is they are the strongest right now on record in the world. Why are these EU methane regulations so critical?
Well, they seem to be very critical. Chris Ryan, the US Energy Secretary, has just been in Brussels and bullied the European Commission because he still wants the Commission to cancel all those climate provisions, and the methane regulation seems to be first on the list. He said this is a colossal wreck, and he doesn't want it. And if he says so, I think it can't be nothing bad. So I think the methane regulation is a huge opportunity. As you said, I think it's the best methane regulation we probably have on this planet, and we need to strongly implement that. What's debated right now is its input standard in particular. So the EU, or part of that regulation, is to set up an input standard, which would also integrate all methane emissions coming from oil and gas production and transportation in third countries into that system. And of course, we hear many voices at this moment from industry who want to stop that, being against that. The argument that we use is competitiveness, but on the other hand, those voices are not so loud. There are also countries preparing to comply with those rules. Nigeria, for example, other countries from the Middle East. And I think the task for us right now is to get coordinated. Good thing is that we have events like this with important players like IGSD, like the organization, our organizations, the CCIC and others, because this battle will be really important. We really can't allow the industry to kick out that regulation.
Okay, we're going to have to switch to the next panel. Justin, do you want to have one last word?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
We're told often that there's enough certified gas in the US to meet the EU's demand. I recommend you research that if it's true. If it were true, why does Chris Wright have to go to the EU and say, get your methane regulations, we want US dollars? Chris Wright made his money in the fracking industry. He knows how dirty it is. He knows there is no way US gas to ever meet the US methane regulations.
Okay, thank you. And we're showing your video, so you can go to Oilfield Witness to see more videos like that, correct? Yes.
And let me add one sentence. The thing here is that US LNG is the most expensive fuel the Europeans can buy, so it's going to be the first thing they're going to kick out if they want to have affordable energy. This goes well hand in hand with the environmental considerations here. And this is why Chris Wright is looking for this market. He has to create this market because it's not there.
It's not there. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. We're going to invite our second panel is focusing on agricultural sources of methane. We will hear from Lisa, who directs Changing Markets Foundation, and Jens Hertler, who is a senior expert on air quality at Environment Action Germany. So, starting with you, Nusha, can you give us a sense of just how important agricultural methane is in the global context? Or yeah,
I think it
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for this concise and even simple question. But it's more than 90% of global three sectors: energy, agriculture, and waste. And especially on waste, it's the second largest, is 39%. But it's near to energy, is 41. So it's a big issue. So when the 39% of agriculture is mainly come from livestock, and this is something where we can reduce and use measurements to reduce. And it's really important that we can no longer ignore this emission from agriculture. agriculture. So we need to talk about it. We need to raise ambition on agricultural emissions to reduce it. And yet, so far, political ambition is not so big. It's more moderate, and in some places, it's even being scaled back. So, one more point to talk about it. Yeah, and at the same time, we have the farmers. I talk from farmers and from industrial farmers. That are the first and already feeling strongest impacts of climate change and air quality issues. So they have smaller harvest, lower incomes, and greater risk for themselves. And that's why we must bring them on board. Their work must be valued from all of us, from the consumers. And only if we get them on board, we can achieve acceptance, and so we can move forward in this direction. But the good news are that solutions are already on the table. So we have technical, but we have also demand-side measures to reduce methane. So we talked about medical livestock management for manual treatment and so on. And so we combined it with consumer-based strategies, so we can significantly reduce methane. We must utilize all the political approaches that we have in use, especially at the moment we can achieve to achieve and also progress also air pollution, not only climate, but air pollution. At the moment, the revision of the carbon protocol and also the implementation in Europe that the called National Emission Reduction Directive is time sensitive, and we can also address methane as a precursor of air pollution, so that we are. And what we need to is now the political leadership, especially of agricultural policy, with a strict focus on methane. And time is running out. So, and only we determine action when we combine all of our efforts.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Turning to you, Nusha, we know from the global methane assessment that agricultural methane is actually the largest, and yet its source of methane is not currently on the table for methane emissions cuts. How does changing Markets Foundation's research, what do you find in your research on agricultural methane emissions?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. So when the Global Methane Pledge was adopted, the language on agriculture is actually much weaker than on waste and energy, where we talk about all feasible reductions. And when it comes to agriculture, we just talk about incentives, partnerships with farmers, and solutions. Yeah. And when this was passed, there were leaked documents showing that the beef industry actually celebrated this language as a significant win for them. And they said this could have ended much worse for us, and we could have been doing something, but this means it would just continue business as usual. So the National Cattle and Beef Association was very proud of their efforts at the highest political level, where they managed to kind of undermine action at the global level when it comes to agricultural methane. And when we exposed through our work, I mean, not just us, but several investigative journalists, etc., is that this is down to agricultural exceptionalism, where the sector gets special treatment, which kind of leads to all carrots and no sticks approach, and a lot of sensitivities around how we treat farmers. We tried to shift this narrative to show that actually this is not down to individual farmers, that we have huge meat and dairy companies that have most of their methane within their supply chains. And these companies also have huge resources that they should be investing into solutions and supporting farmers, either with technical measures or with transition towards other ways of producing food. We looked at the 5 biggest meat and 10 dairy companies, and their methane emissions are actually higher than total methane of Russian Federation, which is, all 3 sectors. So that's huge. And even individual companies, if you look at for example, Dairy Farmers of America, their methane is estimated to be close to UK entire livestock sector, and Tyson's methane is estimated to be similar to the livestock sector of Australia. And yeah, when you look at the action that these companies are taking, meat industry, it's close to zero. We try to look at their investments. JBS, for example, the biggest meat company in the world. It's based in Brazil, but it also produces in the UK, US, etc. And they basically had a net zero target, which later they dropped. And we tried to look at their investment. It's something along 0.03% of their revenue is actually going into climate solutions. And a lot of it is greenwashing how great their net zero target was, I have to say. Dairy, it's moving too slowly. Like we see, Danone was the first one that set 30% reduction target into the year 2023. And they tried to create a little bit more of a momentum, getting other companies on board. Now we have 5 dairy companies reporting, and some are developing action plans. But given that methane is around 50% of the footprint of dairy companies, this is also too little too late. And I would just add with what Durwig was saying, promises are not enough. It's going too slowly. They're also easy to break. We also need regulation when it comes to big meat and dairy companies, because it's not about farmers. These are huge corporations. They have resources to act, and they're not really investing into these solutions.
So can you speak to what exactly the EU is doing right now on agricultural methane emissions reductions?
Yeah, I mean, in the EU also they had agriculture as part of the Green Deal, and agriculture is actually one of the few sectors where emissions are stagnating, especially emissions like methane and nitrous oxide. And part of their long-term climate targets, there was this 30% reduction on non-CO2 emissions, but this got dropped after the lobbying of the big lobby. What we see as a major opportunity, because any way you square it, right? They need to do something on agriculture, because otherwise we can't meet our targets. We can't become net zero, and we can't meet our Paris Agreement. Methane is 54% of total methane emissions come from agriculture. So what we really see as a major opportunity is what Jens was talking about, NEC directives, so national emissions ceiling, which had 33% methane reduction targets in the previous round of revisions. And we're really hoping to bring this back, because methane regulation was kind of when this methane target got taken out of the NEC directive. It's due to be revised again this year. And we're really hoping that we'll be making the case that methane targets should be brought back into place.
Okay, thank you so much, Janice and Nusha. Up next, we're going to hold a government roundtable, and I wanted to welcome Durwig to Okay. Eamon, we have the Eamon, joining us now is Eamon Ryan, Minister for Environment, Climate, Communications and Transport in the Irish government from 2020 to 2025. In that time, he was also appointed EU climate finance negotiator for COP27 and 28, and ministerial pair with responsibility for climate adaptation negotiations in COP29. And he was recently selected to co-chair the International Energy Agency for its 50th anniversary meeting in 2024. And on top of all of that, he was the leader of the Green Party of Ireland from 2011 to 2024. Thank you so much for joining us. Minister Ryan, can you tell us about what progress we are making on the Global Methane Pledge? What are some of the successes and what are some of the challenges that you see now that we're halfway through the time that we set for ourselves to cut methane emissions by 30% below 2020 levels by 2030?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. I was coming from Uptown, where I don't know how you could have made it so quickly. But I think we agreed afterwards. It was a very interesting meeting. I want to just quote from, to answer your question. Ed Miliband was speaking at that earlier meeting. And I think he absolutely rightly and accurately said we should be very somber and really that we're not on track. You know, we're not reducing emissions. We're nowhere near the 30% reduction that so many countries have pledged to. So that's our reality. But actually, you would also see there's a possibility in terms of pulling this emergency brake. Are the conditions in place to do it? I know your sense, or whether others here, but I think they are. The emissions are still rising, particularly in agriculture and waste, mainly our increasing number of livestock. You said in the previous 2 minutes, I absolutely agree with it. We know about that in Ireland. We have our own dairy and beef sector and the challenges in agriculture. Energy, there has been progress, but nothing like the scale of progress that's possible. But by these key measures, by setting real standards that change the market, and that's not an undoable, the European Union has the regulations now. They need to be really financed, made really forced. Japan, Korea, UK, others doing the same. We can change the market, particularly for the likes of LNG and obviously created international gas. And in setting those, and I think that's, to a certain extent, in my mind, has been one of the key issues coming up in COP30, that can we hold the line on that and deliver it. And then CCC is doing a whole load of different work, different projects that I think can further help. And the World Bank, similarly, they have this new trust that they're about to be able to deploy that would really support national governments. So while we should be somber and realistic and pulling the emergency at the brake and calling out the alarm, there is another side of this meeting story that actually could give people some hope. We need that this time.
So just give us a sense of what some of the real success stories are in your mind. Can you point to particular countries that have taken bold action on that?
I mean, the first and obvious and easiest is around fossil, is around flaring and the release of methane, which is now very important by the conditions are now in place. We can see. We can see not just when people are necessarily flaring. I was listening to something the other night saying you can actually see places now where it's not even being flared, it's just being released straight out. And the obvious suspects in terms of the likes of the UKs or Norways or others have obviously shown you can do that and say so. I was a friend of mine heard today from Iraq, and I think it's important that we look for those stories, particularly critically national oil companies. It's not just about the public, the private multinationals or the oil companies. It is about the national oil companies. What I heard my friend from Iraq saying this morning is they're similarly now looking to double down and do that. So that's the first base. That's the easiest, cheapest, saving money way. But I fear, so there are examples that this is absolutely technically doable. It's actually economically beneficial. But the truth is, it's not happening. And what I hear from people that the satellite data looking at it ain't happening. In fact, what's happening is often it's released without even flaring, which is even more catastrophic for the climate.
Well, we're going to turn now to the governmental panel. Why don't you come and join the minister on the stage, and Alex and Derwood Zelke. We're expecting one more speaker. He's on his way? Okay. Well, we'll make room for him. Maybe we can pull up an extra chair should he arrive shortly. And Alex, you are the leader of the subnational Action Coalition, which is under the Trump regime and is, of course, very critical for the U.S. and other countries to take action. Tell us a little bit more about what you see in terms of the potential for subnational methane action. Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for being here. And I will say, having been working on methane issues for 3 decades, it's actually great to see the full house of people who want to hear and talk about methane. That has changed in the last few years fairly dramatically. So I go back, I worked for Governor Jerry Brown in California, and they're one of the scientists who discovered the impact of tourist climate blues. Ron Ramanathan at UC San Diego convinced Governor Brown of the importance of this issue. So I work primarily at the subnational level, and one of the initiatives that we have is, as Daphne said, the Subnational Methane Action Coalition, or SMAC. So very memorable. We have about, at this point, about 30 members around the world. Right now, just 2 in the EU, Luxembourg and Germany and Colombia and Spain. We'd like to expand that, work across all sectors: oil and gas, agriculture, waste, coal. And there are very, I don't want to be Pollyanna, but there are, as the minister said, success stories and reasons for hope at the subnational level. The truism is that about 70% of action is at the subnational level on climate, and that certainly has been my experience. So quickly, a couple of examples. In South Korea, the subnational governments working on waste, really remarkable progress, something like 97% reduction of organics. There are many reasons for that. Some of them are hard to replicate in other places. But there are also efforts around the world around biocovers at subnational levels, which are inexpensive responses to methane emissions from landfills. There's a fair amount of work in Catalonia and California, are the 2 areas that I'm aware of that have methane reduction requirements for agriculture. And there are a fair amount of progress being made in different ways. There are efforts around biogas recovery from agricultural waste. So, and then the oil and gas is mixed and on the national level, not at the state level, although in the U.S., Colorado in particular, and California have excellent regulations and requirements. I could go on, but I know this is a short effort here, so I'll stop.
Well, turning to Durwood, we are expecting another speaker who is on his way from the Brazilian government. But Durwood, we know we, according to the UN Environment Program, we need to cut methane emissions by 45% below 2020 levels by 2030 in order to meet the terms of the Paris Agreement. And that doing so, of course, is, as you've mentioned, the fastest way to cool the planet. How do we go about striking a mandatory global methane agreement with such ambitious cuts in 5 years with methane emissions going this way? We need to do it that way.
I think about this every day when I wake up. I had yet to come up with a perfect answer, but it is the only way to cool the planet in the near term. And so, in a sense, it's inevitable that we'll have a man at some point. It's a question of when. Do we wait until the impacts are so severe that we've already lost half of the opportunity, or do we do it faster? And I use the model of the Montreal Protocol. This is the treaty that we put together in a remarkably short period of time, less than 2 years, because we feared the UVB radiation that was coming down from a thinning ozone layer that was causing skin cancer and cataracts, suppressing our immune system, degrading our sinks. And we decided we needed a treaty. Again, 2 years it took to negotiate that. With a small group of countries, 24, there were 42 when we finally ratified, and then it grew and grew. We think of it as a start and strength treaty, and that treaty has put the stratosphere goes up there on the piano by 2086. And at the same time, has avoided as much warming as CO2 causes today. It's pretty remarkable. It's on course to avoid 2.5 degrees Celsius warming, 1.7 this by the end of the century, 1.7 for taking out fluorinated gases, almost another full degree, 0.85 degrees from protecting sinks, forests, and other sinks that were being degraded by excess UV radiation. So it's a hell of an agreement to inspire us and to model methane removal. So to be very specific, what we do right now is what the Climate and Clean Air Coalition is doing with the European Union is doing with their regulator, is build the pieces of this right now. So the CCAC has put together on something that is modeled after the Montreal Protocol called the Methane Technology Economic Assessment, to tell all of the countries exactly what they need to do to mitigate methane. What does it cost? What's the technology? All the solutions that are out there. And they're doing the science, they do the scientific assessment here, also the same as the Montreal Protocol. And that's where we get all of the data right now, is from the scientific assessment. So build the pieces, including national methane regulations. We've got carbon mapper, we've got IMEO, we've got the methane hunters sharing this here. And there are great people out there identifying all of the leaks. And so you can't hide anymore. And we will build the pieces, and then we will assemble them when the moment is right. And the political leadership, including from Prime Minister Motley from Barbados, who has made binding a priority for climate vulnerable countries, which are now more than 70 in that group. So this is an interesting coalition. The vulnerable who recognize methane is essential. They can't adapt to what's coming if we go past these points. And so Europeans and the Californians and the Coloradans and the Catalonians, there are people who are ready. And then we put this together.
So for those who are watching online, if you'd like to send any questions to press@methaneaction.org, feel free to do so. I'm going to take some questions from people here in the room in just a minute. But I wanted to turn back to you and ask, in terms of COP30, what is your sense of how methane is going to be handled at COP30 in Belém, Brazil? Do you have a sense that it is going to be acted on more definitively this year, or is there some other form where action is going to be taking place?
I think it is. I think it will be critical and central to COP. The Brazilian presidency have a clear understanding and sense of that. It is one of the areas where this issue, do we set regulations, or do we collectively, not trade barriers, but just making sure that the markets are actually reflecting the reality of what we need to do. And so I think that issue will be cool. I think there are other developments that we can make in Green COP30, what Durham is to say there, following the example of the protocol, Montreal Protocol, to really resource that technical economic advisory panel to one of the things CCAC is looking to do and get agreed in COP, having funding for it, because we don't have current funding, is to put really strong regulatory assisted or administrative assistance for local governments for their regulatory systems, for operations in silos. And that's not exactly hold the front page, but actually by having that initiative in capacity building and getting the funding for some of those programs. That then gives, I think, builds confidence in countries right across the world that we have steps forward. And it's really challenging times, obviously, politically. But in some ways, I think with the US as an observer role, not as a central decider of calling the shots, there is that opportunity to make those agreements, in my mind. And I think it's around the likes of EU regulations, around the likes of support for capacity building and for following that Montreal Protocol precedent in terms of real, I mean, it's about switching out from pledges to performance and delivering real projects that aren't just pilot projects but scale up. And I think the mechanisms for that is one of the things that I think can give people a sense of.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. Anyone have any burning question they'd like to ask? Yes.
This doesn't relate to this panel directly, but the previous panel discussion of agriculture. I heard no discussion of rice. Rice cultivation. And it was equal to the dairy and cattle.
It's about 7% for emissions from rice cultivation. It's actually quite, you guys should speak to it if you've been working with it. There's a lot of work done in China, in California, and in actually a lot of jurisdictions at subnational and national level, both to reduce the time that rice is in water and also reduce the crop itself to reduce when
Yeah.
How does the 7% compare to the?
Let me repeat this question for, so the question was about methane emissions from rice. How does that compare, the 7% compared to the methane emissions from cattle?
So cattle is, enteric emissions alone from cattle are over 20% worldwide. So livestock is huge. Rice is significant. It's not nearly as big.
And some would say it's more of a survival emission than a luxury emission, which some feel that livestock is more of a. Yes, go ahead.
I'm Sarah, Chairman Government. Not comment on constantly trashing my champion role. Let's talk about agriculture because I also wanted to comment about the agricultural. Because I find it in my work not very helpful to talk about livestock. But I would find it more helpful in the methane context to not go so much into the vegan direction, but into winning by division and ruling out the cattle. And really focusing on cattle. Leave people with the chicken fillet at this point. We can discuss the chicken fillet at a later stage in our climate transition, but at this point, in terms of methane, we really need to talk about beef consumption, and only that, to not trip into the vegan vogue discussion. It caused a lot of trouble with that. And really focus on, you can keep your chicken burger, but you can't keep your beef burger. And also not focus on the farmers, because the farmers are super an aggressive force in that sense, but really on the consumer side of that. And we can only reduce the beef production if we reduce the consumption. Really single it out from pork and chicken as a division mechanism. I think that is an important step forward.
Thank you. Lucia, why don't you come up and have a seat?
Thank you for this question. I think, no one's really talking about veganism. When we talk about methane reductions, we're just talking about reducing, you're right, though, reducing consumption is, a really critical demand measure. And we did model this for the European Union. And we saw that actually, if you, as governments, start implementing dietary health recommendations, which are actually even the ones that don't yet include sustainability, because a lot of governments like Swedish, Danish, Austrian, etc., they started including sustainability consideration also into dietary health guidelines. We'll also see plans that come out with planetary health by next week. And the dietary health recommendations that are on, I like to say this, it's on some websites, right? But they're not really being implemented. But if you did implement them, you would get, in Europe, more than 45% reduction of methane. And that doesn't even mean cutting out beef and dairy. It means 50% reduction of beef consumption and a quarter reduction of dairy. And you would meet your science-based target, not the pledge, the science-based target. And if around half of people, because again, this like discussion is often absolute, right? And we're kind of like, you should go vegan, or you should eat less and stuff like that. But you know, even if half the population adheres to these dietary guidelines, you get 30% methane cut, right? And if 10% population, and you do technical measure as well, you also get your methane cut, right? So I would like to emphasize that demand side measure is really, really important, and that corporate policies, targets to get these big companies to actually invest in reductions and support farmers in that. Because I agree, it shouldn't be on the farmers, right? But like farmers are often used by these companies as an excuse not to do anything. So yeah.
Okay, I've got one question online, and I'll take a few more here. What role do you see for the European border carbon adjustment mechanism in accelerating emissions reductions, methane emissions reductions? Would you like to respond to that?
I know it's controversial that a developing country is seen as a kind of a tariff trade barrier. I don't think that coming from a European perspective. I think it's similar to what I was talking about the methane regulations earlier on. It's trying to set standards, but also trying to make sure that there's the pricing of carbon in other markets where that it doesn't come into effect. And it's a way of spreading a carbon pricing mechanism. It's interesting, actually, the history of this, as I understand, going right back to Kyoto, the Europe established an emissions trading system. It didn't particularly want to do it. It was actually trying to keep the Americans happy. So they were really pushing it. It was okay to do it. It's one of the best things we've done because it raises revenue and then reallocate towards decarbonization. And similarly with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, I think can be a way of spreading that good signal to price the pollution. And it's one of the advantages that takes you away from individual doing the right thing because it's just putting the price, it's an indicator, make your choice, and it steers things in the better direction. So,
you think it can be expanded to methane?
I think the methane, what you're looking at there is slightly different. The first thing you need to get is the standards around imports that you're saying, I've got a contract, I'll purchase, it's not the tax, it's not the money. It's just saying it has to be a certain standard. So it's slightly easier. You're not putting a price on anything, you're not putting a cost on anything, you're just saying it just has to be the proper standard. So it's slightly, I think the methane regulations are much easier. It doesn't have that very difficult three-letter period to your next.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciate that answer about the range, you know, if it's half the population or region because of the effects of reducing need for different people is different depending on the country. But I have a question on the possible hope of regulation to fix the problem. So we have the desire to ask individual humans and farmers and at that point to make behavioral change that's difficult and hard. What can you all believe if you could get regulation past all the ones that you want, of course, that only affect the bottom line of the corporation. So it doesn't trickle down and all of this cost is more, and they still make money, they still make as much. And that's still like, we're trying to understand sort of like how much new technologies need to be built to make it and start to think about the possible regulations. I just want to think of like the total possibility before we think of
The reason I took the microphone is because I'm from California, and there actually are regulations in California around this, and it has mixed results. Part of what's happening in California is a little bit unique because it's 20% of dairy for the U.S. And so dairy in California are primarily in kilos, confined animal feeding operations. And so the dairy industry is actually consolidating more of those because these dairy digesters, which is actually quite a good, under some circumstances, a good technology that reduces a fair amount of emissions, but it also creates other environmental problems and environmental risks. So there are other issues around the regulations that I'll stop with.
Okay, and I want to introduce, thank you for making it here. I'm sorry you got stuck in traffic. The National Secretary of Urban Environment, Water Resources, and Environmental Quality, Minister of Environment and Climate Change in Brazil, Adalberto. Secretary is key leader for COP30, including on the emerging methane strategy. And as I mentioned earlier, COP30 will be held in Berlin, Brazil. He's also the co-chair of CCAC, the Climate Clean Air Coalition. So, in the amount of time that we have left, I'd love to hear from you on what your thoughts are in terms of getting methane action at COP30, and what you see playing out in the next few months for COP30.
Well, thank you for the invitation. Sorry for the delay. Here in New York, sometimes we leave half an hour earlier to arrive half an hour late. Today was my Tuesday mistake because they sent Chinatown. So it was nice to but we were able to. I wasn't the only one there. We had other persons who lost their but sometimes when we have goals and we know where we want to be, we're going to have, construction work on the subway, which delays you. Sometimes they give you the address because they don't know the real data, the real information, and how to get there. But we are positive that COP30 will be the COP which will put us in the right position to understand if we are moving right or not. It's all about implementation, right? After 10 years of the Paris Agreement. But there's a huge expectation that when we receive all the NDCs, I think today President Lula with Gutierrez there, a lot of the announcements are coming, China's NDCs. But until now, we have at least 50 around NDCs delivered until yesterday.
NDCs are nationally determined.
The national determined contributions that the countries have to fulfill the Paris Agreement. And there's a huge gap. Some countries are leading, the European Union, UNDC, Brazil's UNDC, which goes for up to 67% reduction in 2035. We're on track. So we reduced the deforestation in the last 2 years, 50%. It's 500 million tons. It's larger than a lot of the countries. A big country, it's larger than UK's emission, just with the deforestation. But we know there's a huge gap. And what are we going to tell society when we all meet at COP30 in Belém? We're going to say, look, unfortunately, the NDCs are not as ambitious. We are on track to 1.5, actually not even on track to 2 degrees. So, well, that's life, Let's wait to the next round of NDCs. We can't wait. We don't have any other option. So the only option we have is arriving in Belém, acknowledging that our NDCs are far away from urban needs. We made hundreds, thousands of announcements and commitments. As you all might know, Brazil has selected 30 specific areas, GST, that we all agree on why on COP28. So each of the areas there have an acceleration action plan for 5 years that we plan to launch at Belém, going all the way to COP5, to really try to get us back on the track of 1.5. So in order to really deliver these agendas, we will have to understand what worked well, what didn't, what are existing technologies that are proven, that are cost benefit, that are cheap. In the case of methane, oil and gas, all technologies are proven, they're available, it's somehow easy to implement. If all countries would follow Norway's standard, we would reduce 90% of the emissions from oil and gas. But every single day, the satellites are seeing leakage everywhere. It's not only that, it's leakage everywhere. It looks like a Swiss cheese, with all the holes moving around, but everywhere. So we know that we are far away. On the waste, we also believe there is a huge potential. At the Summit of the Leaders, we added in the agenda methane. So the presidents will talk about methane and non-CO2. Of course, we don't control that agenda because it's another level of decision, but it's there. We also have the Local Leaders Forum, supported by Bloomberg and C40 in Rio, between the beginning of November, 3 and 5th. And in that forum, just for Brazil, we are planning to bring a lot of the mayors that will announce new investments on the landfill capture on their waste systems that we approved with the Climate Fund that the Minister of Environment created, like $2 billion green bonds that we had. We plan to reduce 1 million tons of methane equivalent. If I'm not mistaken, the word is 500, 600. One country with 12 cities delivering 1 million. What about if we have 500 cities? All the big Chinese, Indian, in Africa, which is going to be the biggest cities in the world. So we know the solutions that are there. So we also CCAC will have the launch of our report in the meeting. And it doesn't look good too. We are far away. Even on the global methane pledge that we also need a 30% reduction. And on the plans we have in the announcements, we could even get up to 40% reduction on the business as usual if we deliver everything. But this 40% on the business as usual actually is only 10% reduction. Absolutely. So we gotta change what we're doing. And Brazilian president is certain that short-life climate pollutants, especially methane, which represents 30% of the global warming in the short term, is our emergency exit. It's the only way. CO2 is going to take so much longer, Brazil is pushing a lot for the financing page, fair transition, gender, also the roadmap for the fossil fuel, because we committed this at COP28. We haven't been seeing too much. So President Lula has proposed this goal to be announced with UN that would oversee the implementation of the action agendas. We also proposed to ministers which are making summit. We're going to do besides the ministerial of the GMP, we're going to do a methane summit. We are thinking about actions and a menu of options to propose to countries. One of it would be to create a task force that would really integrate and coordinate what everybody's doing. Because the World Bank is already taking 20 billion. CCAC is doing 50 projects, and I don't know how many. Everybody's working, but we feel there is not enough coordination between all the stakeholders. So if we really get the numbers, good monitoring and verification system, we know how much it costs and where we need to go. Maybe could be and will be for the third presidency one of the biggest priorities for us to try to find a solution out of the emergency, the climate emergency we are on.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we are now at time. Unless we want to take one last question, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. We can go over lunch. Okay, Dominic, go ahead.
Now it's on. Thank you, Daphne. Thank you for your contributions. That was very interesting. Dominic Farmiola, elected officials to protect America, elected officials to protect the Earth on the international side. we're never going to bring local elected officials. My question would be, given this is a both local and a global problem, and given what's happening in the political situation in the U.S., how can subnational governments, say in the United States, coordinate, work together, but also with national governments to deliver what we need?
Well, let me just jump in first here before I pass by. Yesterday, the Minister of the Environment, we signed an MOU with the Governor of California, for example, in environmental energy transition, thermal credits. And Brazil has approved in our NDCs that cities are part of the process. The subnational governments have to be. We created in the implementation what we call this multi-level governance structure under one of the initiatives called CAMP that was announced at COP22. So in our climate plan, which is the implementation of our NDC that we just updated, the targets are on the mayor and on the governor. So the targets are there, the instruments are there, because who delivers the policies that will reduce are mayors and governors. Presidents doesn't have. He can say, oh, I'm not going to do, I'm going to do, but he doesn't. Who puts the money is the private sector. The mayors control everything in the city, and the governors has most of the regulations. So even if one or two big countries, the federal level says, I don't want to be part of this, it doesn't matter. Because at the end, the governors and the mayors do what they're doing because they suffer the consequence of climate change. If they don't resolve the problems, they won't be re-elected. It's a different game. So let's talk. We have a lot of announcements we are trying to develop. Not announcements of new things, because we just want to assess the announcements that we're doing and have an acceleration plan for 5 years until the NDCs at COP35. We want the governors and mayors to be with that. So talk to me here after. Let's talk to you.
It'll not surprise you when you just heard that Brazilian states are the largest members of the subnational methane action coalition.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us, and hope you can join us now.